areas. We're going to look at the face-on view, which is going to show us how our weight's positioned, how it's moving, essentially how our body's moving, and what our arms and the club are doing. And then from the down the line view, we can actually see the direction that we're swinging the golf club. Now, what I like to get into very early on when we're setting up is the distance from the ball, how the ball position can impact contact, and then we'll kind of build out the other areas. So first and foremost, if I'm looking at distance from the ball, I like to use a reference which is about a foot's width from the ball. So you can see here, sometimes the grip is about a perfect guideline as well. But often I see golfers getting into trouble simply because they're adopting, let's say, their normal setup position for a basic chip shot, gets them too far away from the ball, and it can get the club working out of position. So first and foremost, we're going to be about a foot's width from the ball. About a club length maximum would be in between my feet. And the trail foot here can be reasonably square with the lead foot slightly flared open. And that just helps us with the movement through the ball. So that would be the basis of the setup. As far as our weight's concerned, if I set a guideline of the middle point here of the shaft on the ground roughly in between my feet, then I'm just going to have a very slight lean towards the target. And that might feel like about 65, 70% on that lead leg, very light on the right side. And the idea with that, it gets the contact point more forward, gets us away certainly from setting up too far behind the ball or being too far behind the ball when we hit. So we're going to have the weight position slightly on the lead leg. I have a slight preference when chipping to have the grip position a little bit more in the palm. If you watch some of the earlier videos, you would certainly have seen this. And the idea behind that, when it's in the palm, we can have a little bit less wrist play, much like a putt. We could certainly say that the chipping action and the putting action is more or less in the same family. It tends to be more of a one lever motion, a little bit of wrist play and chipping, as we've spoken about, but tends to be more of a one lever motion, a little bit more of a controlled motion. So I like getting it up in the palm. It takes a little bit of the wrist activity out of it. It also encourages me to get a little bit more upright here. Again, if I'm down in the fingers and I'm too far away, I'm more in this position, and that can compromise kind of contact, etc. So we're going to get in close. We're going to get it more or less in the palm. Depending on where the ball position and what shot we're going to play, the hands are going to be slightly to the lead side. So that's baseline for setup. A little bit to do with contact and the low point, and this is still staying on setup. So in our setup position, we could agree that the left shoulder here, or the lead side, forms the center of the swing, or the low point. So wherever this is at impact is more or less where the club's going to bottom out. From the shoulder to my wrist here forms the radius of the swing, or the length of the swing. So I can break that radius in many ways by bending my elbow, by bending my wrist. And again, as a benchmark, we want to keep that radius intact. We're not looking to break that on the way back or the way through. So it's an important point that we start with that lead side and understand where that is in relation to the ground, and where our weight is going to have an impact on our contact. We obviously have a lot of feel in our hands, but I always like to start with some body positions, or at least some information on the body and how it should be moving. So I'm going to break this down into three basic sections. We're going to have the upper and lower centers, how they should move. We're going to have the arms, how they're coordinated with the chest, and then we're going to have the use of the golf club. So if I place the shaft right here under my armpits and just put my arms across my chest, that basically links my upper arms to my chest, and it's going to allow me just to make a movement however I want to of my upper body. And what we're looking for here when we set up firstly is that the shoulders are reasonably level. We don't want any excessive tilt. And when we go back, we want to feel a slight tilt of the shoulders going back. So we don't want any translation to the right. We don't want any excess movement as well towards the target side, but we just want a slight tilt of the shoulders going back. And if you looked at my left ear, you might notice it very slightly moves towards the target. Very natural because of the movement of the shoulders. So there's very little hip movement, if any. I'm not trying to freeze my hips, but I'm also not trying to move them. So a slight tilt of the shoulders going back and a mini pivot going through. Now that mini pivot is going to come from the belt buckle and the chest, and that's going to be a little bit more rotational. So slight tilt of the shoulders, mini pivot going through. I'm not looking for any rocking back. If anything, I'm going to keep my weight in position and moving around that lead leg. From here, we want to attach the arms or get the arms in place. So I'm going to hang my arms straight down, take my grip, and basically going to make the same movement and see how my arms get transported by the movement of my shoulders and a little bit by the movement of my lower center here. So slight tilt of the shoulders going back, mini pivot going through. Now, these might seem fairly basic, but I feel they're quite important because they are going to set the foundation for the correct movement. And I do see a lot of golfers kind of messing these areas up, even to the extent where there's very little movement through here, and I see a lot of breaking of the elbows. Now, that's obviously going to compromise contact on the face, potentially hitting behind the golf ball. So we really want to develop the awareness of how the body's moving, even in this kind of very small range of motion, but how the body's moving, how the arms are linked to that, how we can then get our connection with the golf club in place and move that by moving this body efficiently. So let me make a few practice swings here. I'm now going to get a sense of chest, arms, and at this stage I'm going to use no wrist action. This is going to be a very passive wrist action. I've got my grip, which is a little bit more in the palm. Now, if I hit a shot from there, it's only going to send the ball a fairly short distance because there's very little energy to the golf club. Now, this can be a great technique, by the way, for a chip putt or very simple chips, tight lies. But if I want to move the ball a little further, it gets a little bit challenging. So what we do need in any good chipping action, especially if we're trying to move the ball more than sort of 4 or 5 yards in the air, is a little bit of wrist play. Now, very careful when we talk about this because it can simply be awareness of grip pressure. If I'm carrying too much tension, it's very hard to have the club heads kind of separate from the wrist, so everything kind of moves as one, like a putt. As I start to soften off my grip pressure, I can get a little bit of movement. So you'll notice the handle's moving a little bit. The distance from my wrist to the handle is increasing, and that shows me that I've got a little play in my wrist. In a full swing, we get the club very far away from that wrist, so we get it a lot more loaded, but we really don't need that at all when we're chipping because it's more of a control shot. Why is the play in the wrist so important? Well, for me, it provides a little bit of feel for the club head. Certainly can take tension away. And just like if I was going to throw a ball underarm, I would do it and just have a little bit of softness in my wrist because I can judge the throw a little bit better. I've got a little bit more feel in that sense. So that's what we're going to look at as far as wrist play. So we could say, even though essentially the shoulders are moving the least amount and the arms would be second and the club head probably moves the most, the sense is that it's driven more by the shoulders, which then transports the arms, which then gets the club just moving a touch. Often I talk to my students, and we'll get into this more when we talk about pitching, about the wrist having a range of 0 to 5. So 0 to 5, just like gears in a car. And really when we're chipping, we're barely getting the wrist into first gear. In fact, I would say it's even lower than that. It's just a very hint of a little bit of play in the wrist. That again can help us to provide a feel for the club head. And you can see there the ball just popping up a little more than before because I just have a little bit more energy into the club head because of the wrist play. I'm using a 56 here, so we can see the ball popping up. And we're probably getting something like a 50 carry, 50 roll.